Crime victims don't want the Prime Minister's sympathy. They want to know why he's broken his promise. They want to know why liberal bail remains in place.
This government is bringing forward comprehensive bail reform. This comprehensive bail reform is based on extensive consultations with the provinces and territories.
We have Constable Greg Pershella, who was killed by a man released yet again on bail. We have a woman killed by her husband after he was arrested and released 30 times.
This government, which has been in place for 6 months, has undertaken comprehensive consultations with law enforcement, with the provinces.
Crime and punishment, or more precisely, bail reform, have been front and center in question period these days. The federal government is expected to bring forth new regulations and legislation on bail reform this fall. But that didn't stop Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre from introducing a non-binding motion in the House of Commons. And it calls on the Liberals to pass, and he's calling on the Liberals, I should say, to pass the Jail Not Bail Act. Now, if passed, the act would strengthen bail laws to prevent someone from getting bail if they've been convicted of a major offense in the last 10 years. So what's driving the political debate on crime, and does the Prime Minister need to move a little more quickly on this? Let's bring back the front bench. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monty Solberg. Marco, as a former public safety minister, you know this file pretty well. So what is the risk here for the Prime Minister if he isn't matching the urgency, not only of what we're seeing from across the aisle with Pierre Poilievre, but the provinces on this? Because a number of premiers have been asking for this for months.
Well, I think the risk, in short, is that you're out of step with an increasing concern from Canadians about the level of violent crime that we see in our communities. But I'm confident that the federal government is seized with the situation. And as I think we said last week when we raised the subject, the sooner that we can table this comprehensive bail reform package, the better. And I think that there are things that we can do. I mean, you mentioned my experience as a Minister of Public Safety. I was also a federal prosecutor for 10 years. So having worked on the front lines of the criminal justice system, we can make changes to the rules when it comes to including more offenses under the criminal code that puts the onus on the accused to demonstrate why they should be released. We can adjust the criteria of the courts when it comes to how they decide who gets released and who stays in jail. It's certainly my view, I think it's the view of most Canadians, that if you're a repeat violent offender and you've got a long rap sheet, then you should remain in jail pending your trial. So I do think that that's important to say. But on the flip side, I don't think it's helpful to resort to sloganeering. And so saying things like catch and release, I think really may resonate. But the fact is that when it comes to catching criminals, we depend on our police to do that. And when it comes to releasing them, we depend on the courts, both of whom are independent. And if the Conservatives, really want to, put their money where their mouth is, they should vote in line with the federal government when it introduces the budget. And they should vote in support of Bill C-2 because there are additional resources that are there for law enforcement who will be able to go out there and catch those offenders before they can do any more harm.
James, despite what Marco was saying there on sloganeering, you're still hearing from people. I think, major polling that we're seeing out there in metropolitan areas where the Liberals did win a lot of seats. And this is a concern amongst those people. So how much more quickly do you think the government needs to move on this, even though we are hearing that they're ready to table it this fall?
Before the federal government delivers a piece of mail or paves an inch of highway or builds an airport or does anything, the first obligation of any government is to protect people who play by the rules from those who don't. Protect the law abiding from the law breaking, flat out. And, I would advise anybody who's a public office holder, your mayor, city councilor, member of parliament, MLA, do ride-alongs with your police officers, your police departments in your communities. I did that every year with the Coquitlam RCMP and the Port Moody Police. And you get a real frontline appreciation for what police officers and communities are dealing with on a real human level in terms of crime. It's not about statistics. It's about an experience that people have on a daily basis. And people are increasingly frustrated on a growing basis all across this country about wanting to see, resources be meaningful. 99% of all policing resources go chasing the same 1% of the population who are recidivist criminals, who can't keep themselves out of jail, who are just hell-bent on constantly committing crime and disorder. And it's always escaped me politically why the Liberal Party, the other governing party in the country, doesn't move and frankly skew more to the side of a clear public opinion on this. When you have people who are habitual career lifelong criminals, why they're not held more sternly and effectively accountable by our system. I hope Marco is right. I take him at his word. He's always been a sincere person in my observation. I hope he's right, that the Prime Minister is sincere about this. And I actually think that this is an item where Parliament could work very effectively on this. There are members of Parliament who are former prosecutors, former defense attorneys, former police officers and police chiefs who are members of Parliament. And if they all came together and actually thoughtfully worked on something constructive and substantive, actually this could be a moment where Parliament could work together and do something meaningful for Canadians. And I hope that it comes to that.
Christy, how likely do you think that is when you consider the atmosphere on Parliament Hill right now and how sometimes it is a race to see who is really the champion of one issue over the other?
Yeah, well, I think how it will probably end will be with the Liberals bringing forward something substantial and meaningful, and the Conservatives saying that's okay, but it's not good enough, which is pretty close to consensus as you're probably going to get in Canada these days. But I really do truly agree with James on this point, that if government is not delivering on safe communities and safe streets for Canadians, nothing else works. I mean, ultimately, if your government, because it is government's job to make sure that that bad guys are in jail and good guys aren't in jail, and that we are all able to walk down the street safely and freely. And this is obviously a bigger issue for women in some communities than others, and men in others. But if we can't count on government to do that, then we really lose our trust in government overall. So really important that we get something done, that the federal government kind of reverse some of the bad decisions we've seen over the last decade. I think they're going to get there. And I do think, though, for Pierre Poilievre, this is a way better political issue for him to run on than just your average issue. I mean, I think when people talk about the economy and Prime Minister Carney having been slow in getting things done, I think Canadians understand why that's the case. When Canadians don't feel safe walking down the street in downtown Vancouver at dusk, that's something that the Prime Minister has to be seized with immediately. So I think you'll see him move fast on it. I don't know if it'll be good enough for everybody, but I do think it'll be a lot better than what we've seen for the last decade.
Monty, how do you measure this in terms of either speed or making sure that they're getting it right? And I say that because I know that the Justice Minister is expected to meet with his provincial counterparts. Do you think that the government needs to move quicker or just to be effective when they do move in this direction?
Well, they need to do both. They need to move very quickly. This is at the forefront of the minds of Canadians just about every day, either when they send their kids off to school or they're heading downtown to go to work, walking past a homeless encampment, this kind of thing. People are concerned about it. I look at the local Facebook group in my community, or a little community, and much of the discussion is about crime. It's jaw-dropping levels of crime compared to anything we've seen in the past. So not only do they need to move quickly, they need to be effective. And to be effective, they have to pass good legislation, but they also need to ensure that the police and the courts are properly resourced. If they don't do that, it'll look good on paper, but it won't work. And we'll be back in the same boat again in a few months, asking where it went wrong, and let's beef up the legislation that they just passed.
Marco, do you think that the Liberal government at this moment is sort of understanding the moment we're in and understanding that, yes, they did get elected on trying to deal with Donald Trump, but maybe that public sentiment in this country is now back to where Monty was talking about? They're looking at their social media and understanding that the car thefts in their neighborhood are still happening. There are still issues in downtown cores. Is the federal government there in their minds and understanding that this is the next big issue that they have to take care of?
Yes, but it requires execution. And so that means getting this legislation introduced, working with parties across the aisle, because this is a minority parliament after all, and getting it passed. And then once it's passed, making sure that both prosecutors and judges and police all alike are trained to implement the law in a way that is effective. And I don't think anybody for 1 second diminishes the impact of violent crime in our communities. I've attended funerals of police officers who have been felled and been killed by repeat violent offenders. I have grieved with victims and families of victims. James is absolutely right. I mean, there is no greater responsibility that the government, or frankly, any individual parliamentarian who represents a community at any level of government has, than to ensure that the people they represent are safe. So this is absolutely a priority that the government has to move quickly and effectively on, and I know that that is something that the Minister of Justice is focused with.
James, what do you think of that sort of balance on making sure that they're also getting it right and making sure that when they do introduce this, that it's comprehensive and that they don't have to come back later to fix things?
I mean, look, I think there's broad consensus here amongst this group here, and we all come from different backgrounds, federal, provincial, blue team, red team historically. I think you do that by working with provincial attorneys general, working with the police associations, working with advocates for victims. I generally don't think when you're talking about repeat criminals, especially violent criminals, and repeat property crime criminals, that I don't think the government can really err on being too tough. I don't think there's any political risk in being too aggressive and too tough. You're better to err more on the side of sternness, public safety, holding people accountable more aggressively, and then maybe sliding back towards the center for kind of a mixed metaphor. But I think you're better to err on the side of radical public safety than erring on the side of trying to get the right balance. When you're dealing with repeat criminals who have no capacity to engage in civil society and to play by the rules because they've chosen to live outside the boundaries of the rules, there's a certain percentage of society that just cannot be reincorporated. And those are the people who are inhaling all of our policing and judicial resources, and they need to be held to firm account. And it's just a fundamental expectation, I think, that the public has. And I think the public is, Christy, I think, inferred, I think the public is way ahead of the politicians on this.
Yeah,
and I think if Parliament doesn't get something really significant done between here and Christmas, that the system can realize early in the new year after royal assent, then I think people will lose a lot of confidence in this Parliament after all the rhetoric that we've seen.
Christy, I'm out of time, but I'll give you 15 seconds if you want it.
Provincial governments play a big role in this. Provincial governments are responsible for public safety. So let's not forget that the government of British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and farther east in the country, they have to make sure that there are enough jail cells, that there are enough prosecutors, that there are enough judges, and that there is enough court time. All of this working depends on provincial governments actually delivering on the things that they say they can do. And rather than just complaining that the federal government isn't doing its job, it's a team effort.
And full credit to Pierre Poilievre for sniffing this issue out and bringing it to the fore.
And speaking of team effort, I appreciate this team for being together on this subject. Christy Clark, James Moore, Marco Mendicino, and Monte Solberg. Appreciate you all being there.